Now, let's dive into headaches. So right now, many of us are going through, what I like to call COVID stress. And so that COVID stress, for a lot of you, it's really hitting the noggin, COVID stress. And so it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on with COVID, whether some people call it a plandemic, some people call it a scamdemic, some people are hiding in their houses and closets, some people are hiding behind masks. It doesn't matter where you fall. Stress is stress. And so it's all stressful. So whatever you choose to believe about COVID, we know at this point, the stress, the social isolation, the other things that it's creating, we've seen, especially in my practice, we've seen a mass increase in folks dealing with headaches. So there's really four primary types of headaches. We're going to be focusing on several of them here, but let's just kind of outline it for you. There's stress headaches. Now, a subtype of stress headache, stress can induce the three major forms of headaches. So we've got stress that can cause tension style headaches. Stress can also trigger or be a trigger for migraines, and it can also be a trigger for what are called cluster headaches. Now, there's one other primary type of headache. Stress doesn't play so much of a role in, so we'll kind of put it in its own, and that's sinus headaches. And these are kind of basically, sinus headaches are more of a pressure headache. If you've got like a sinus infection or something along that line, for example, it creates an increased mucus production inside your sinus cavities, which creates a pushing effect or a physical, if you will, effect, and creates an external pressure on the head. So that can lead to a sinus type headache as well. This is very common. This type of headache, very common around allergy season. So if you suffer with allergies, particularly environmental allergies, pollen, dust, mold, dander, that type of thing, seasonal ragweed, etc., this is where that sinus issue can come in. But I want you to remember, too, that just because it's an environmental allergy doesn't mean that it can't also be a food allergy triggering this same issue. I get a lot of people right now with food allergies that actually have sinus headaches that are caused by their food allergies because their response to foods they're reacting to is the same as the response for environmental antigens that you might get exposure to. So keep that in mind too. The reason I point all this out is because here's what we know. If you go to the doctor, let's just move this out of the way here. If you go to the doctor, right, and you're seeing that doctor and you're saying, look, doc, I've got a headache. Generally what's going to happen is you're going to get some type of prescription. And it doesn't matter which one. If you have a tension headache, for example, what you're typically going to get is some type of NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. If you've got a migraine headache, you're going to get one of the migraine-based medications, something like a Topamax. If you've got a cluster headache, oftentimes they're misdiagnosed, and so you get the same kind of medication, or you also get an NSAID. And then if you've got a sinus, you're going to get some kind of antihistamine. This is the standard of care, right? Just across the board. So, how many of you tuning in tonight, watching, how many of you been to the doctor for a headache, and this has been the course of action that was recommended for you? If that's the case, just type in yes, and let's just see how many of you tuning in tonight have had this very, same type of experience as well. So I want you to understand that it doesn't matter whether it's tension, migraine, cluster, or a sinus headache. Aside from stress, which again, if you're dealing with this right now, this is a trigger. So it's not a cause as much as it is a trigger. So by itself, stress is generally not the only thing. Triggers, think of triggers as the perfect storm. It's when you have multiple things that are going wrong simultaneously that all kind of convene and lead to the outcome of a headache. But in and of itself, by itself, oftentimes triggers aren't enough. Well, stress is usually not the only trigger. Usually stress is present with a number of other variety of different factors and triggers, and we'll talk about those too. But again, you go to the doctor, and the general rule of thumb is, and this is what I hear all the time, at least from people that come into my practice, is they tell me, I went to my neurologist, I went to my GP, I went to the pain specialist. They gave me medications, and they told me that diet had nothing to do with the headache. And again, fill in the blank, didn't matter which kind of headache, whether it's tension, migraine, cluster, or sinus headache, and that diet completely plays zero role in headache is a myth. Diet plays a major role in headache, and we're going to dive into that a little bit too. And I'll talk to you as well about the top nutrients, vitamins, minerals, as well as that vitamins and minerals that help with headache, but also talk about the top foods that actually trigger these types of headaches. So stick with me. We're going to get to that. So again, if you've been to the doctor, this is generally the course. Now, the problem is, we'll get to in just a minute, is if you're being prescribed a lot of these medications, they deplete iron and B vitamins. And in the case of like aspirin, we even deplete vitamin C, or in the case of something like Tylenol, so that you could be on something like Tylenol or acetaminophen, right? And that depletes glutathione, it can deplete vitamin C, which are also notorious nutrients that when given can actually help with headaches. And then antihistamines can reduce, a lot of people don't realize this, but reduce your stomach acid. But antihistamines also suppress your immune system, but that's, for another day. But if you're worried about COVID, suppressing your immune system is probably the last thing that you really want to think about doing. But suppressing your acid leads to protein malnourishment, leads to B vitamin deficiencies, especially vitamin B12. And so as we'll get into that in just a minute, you'll understand why that's very important to know. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.